Hi, everybody. Mitch Tannenbaum here. Thanks for joining me today for this week's security news update. In the security and privacy alerts section, um, this is in the IT world. There's always challenges. So Palo Alto firewalls, certainly one of the big brand name firewalls, has bugs, just like every other firewall. So I'm not beating them up about it. But they've been warning people for weeks now to go patch their firewall. Well, people don't always listen, unfortunately. And so now what they're measuring is, as opposed to the number of vulnerable firewalls, the number of compromised firewalls. And the firewalls, of course, are supposed to be your first line of defense. So it's good if they're not compromised. One would hope that would be good. So, the moral of the story here, whether you're a Palo Alto user or not, is when your firewall vendor, whoever that may be, tells you that you ought to be patching, is not something you think about doing next week. Next on the alerts department, there's a shopping scam that they took down a piece of it, but it's a fairly common scam. The way the scam works is that the hackers compromise a legitimate website, stand up a product page on that website, and when you click on that link, it takes you to the hacker's lookalike website. Um, that page obviously gets indexed by the search engines, and as a result of that, you might find it, and they do it in a way because they know how to optimize the search engine experience that, it shows up relatively high in the search engine experience. And so you're more likely to hit that page. Um, but the problem is that the people whose website they're compromising, don't have good security and don't have monitoring, don't realize that they've even been compromised. So there's a couple of messages there. One, of course, is to make sure that your websites are patched fully and that you're monitoring them and stuff like that. The other is, what's your best strategy as an end user to, not get hooked into one of these things. Obviously, one thing you can do is look at the address, the URL, make sure that doesn't look sketchy and it makes sense for you. Another is to, especially for unfamiliar websites, not give your bank account information or use services like PayPal or Zelle, because the protections that you have there are significantly less than the protections you have under federal law with a credit card. Um, and if you can, single-use credit cards, and I use this a lot, and some services do it for free. Some services cost a little bit of money. None of them cost a lot of money, but it really helps because even if that single-use card gets compromised, you just shut off that single-use card, and it doesn't affect anybody else. And in fact, if it's literally a single-use, then you don't have to shut it off because it only works one time. There's a lot of variance there. If you need help understanding what the market is there, give us a holler. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. But there's definitely a rich market which will give you a lot of options. Next in the CMMC Q&A, I'm not going to read the questions there, but um, you know, or I'm not going to go over the answers. I'll read some of the questions. How do you determine what level you have to meet? How do we know what CMMC level is required for a particular contract? Labeling of computers, cost. Um, when do we have to comply with NIST 800-171 revision 3? And just because my prime has a specific CMMC certification, does that mean I need to do one too? And the questions like that. So if you're into the CMMC world, which means you're a government contractor, that would be a good place to get some information. Next, in the reference department, the Cloud Security Alliance, which is a great group, you can join it to some degree for free. They have a lot of information. They just released version 5 of their CSA security guidance for critical areas of focus in cloud computing. That is free. I will warn you, it is literally 300 pages, but not as nighttime reading. But as a reference, it's a great document. They also have a PowerPoint. Uh, so that if you're into the cloud and need to understand cloud security, that would be a good resource. Patches department, our dear friends at QNAP, again, have critical flaws in both their NAS and router software. If you haven't patched very recently, this affects different modules. So some of the bugs affect this module and some of the bugs affect that module. And you might say, oh, gee, I don't run picture sharing, so this bug doesn't affect me. But you don't want to be in this situation where, you know, QNAP figures out later that, oh, gee, not only does it affect picture sharing, but it also affects core routing and logging. So just patch if you're running QNAPs. In the legislative and legal department, the Senate has proposed a bare minimum cybersecurity practices for healthcare. I think they're doing that because that's probably the only thing that they stand any chance at all of getting passed through Congress. I think it's a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. It won't really make much of a difference, unless, of course, Congress decides to allocate some money to it, which I'm not counting on that happening. So we'll watch that and see whether anything comes of it. But HIPAA has not been updated in a long time. And it's clear from the number of healthcare organizations that are getting hacked that something needs to be done. Change health being, probably the biggest thing that might possibly spur Congress to do something, affecting something on the order of a third of the U.S. population. In the education department, we have some nastiness going around on the internet, sextortion, and sometimes that bridges the cyber physical realm, and people get so um, frustrated and freaked out by what's happening, which is completely understandable, that they do things in the physical universe like suicide and attempted suicide, multiple ones of those. So, you know, if you have kids, this is probably a good thing for you to read so that you know how to deal with your kids. But B, for everybody, there's no shame in being victimized by one of these sextortionists, and people need to understand that, even though that's hard to do, um, and get help, because the rabbit hole is one that does not have any cheese at the end, and the sextortionists know how to deal with your emotions if you're a victim, and they will win because they're pros and you're not, and you don't have anybody on your side. So, um, for sure. In the breaches department, we're continuing to learn a little bit about the big telco breach. Apparently, they are saying, not apparently, they are saying that the fix for that breach may require the replacement of thousands and thousands of pieces of hardware across all the telcos. Uh, so that's going to be kind of expensive when that happens. Yikes. Also, supply chain management vendor Blue Yonder was hit by ransomware. They support the grocery industry in particular in a big way. It happened just before Thanksgiving, Black Friday. They say they're working around the clock to try to fix things, but it's putting a serious crimp in company supply chain. Starbucks, for example, went to a manual paper process, which I can't imagine is terribly efficient, but it's better than no process at all. Next, in the UK, another hospital declares a major incident. That's a nice euphemism. So Warall University Teaching Hospital, and outpatient appointments have been canceled. Other patients have been told to stay away unless they have a genuine emergency. Um, a staff member said that everything is down. Um, but if you have a genuine emergency, that would be the last place I would go, because they're not gonna have any access to your patient records. And that's the kind of a problem. And that kind of ties to Congress. Of course, that's UK, but the UK Parliament, and the US Congress and all the other countries, need to go off and force the issue, because companies are not going to go off and do this on their own, apparently. Also, Ransom Hub, which is one of the big purveyors of ransomware, claims attacks on Coppell, Texas, as a suburb of Dallas, and the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board. Um, Coppell's problem started over a month ago. The park board said they took immediate action after they were hacked. Um, of course, they couldn't call the police because their phones were down. But the hackers are just winning this because people are not taking the problem seriously. Speaking of people not taking the problem seriously, the city of Hoboken in New Jersey had to shut down the government offices. City Hall is closed. All online city services are suspended. Um, the police are investigating and will have an update as soon as they know something. Oh, right. Um, the problem with these cities is they don't have the expertise. They don't want to pay consultants, which I understand. They can't afford or choose not to afford to pay staff salaries that are commensurate with what the rest of private industry pays. So they can't get anybody. So it's a bit of a problem in the municipal space, but they're gonna have to figure out an answer to it because this is not going away. And then the next one is when is a breach not a breach? It's kind of like if the tree falls into the forest and nobody hears it, kind of thing. Um, there's a company called Property Rec, and they do both public record aggregation and background checks. The public record aggregation is probably less of an issue, but they got compromised, and names, addresses, email, employment histories, social media, to family members, all kinds of stuff that you would expect to find in a background check were compromised. Over 600,000 people, 700 gigabytes of data, and I am sure the lawsuits are not far off. Next, for those of you who accept credit cards, PCI 4.0 adds new requirements for merchants in March. And even if you outsource a part of your PCI process, the compliance requirements apply to you. If you need help with that, please give us a call. The requirements are significant, the changes. The U.S. next, the U.S. has been giving sanctions against China to try to bring them in line with norms. They've not been terribly willing to do that. And what we're seeing now is they're kind of giving us the middle finger. They've developed their own tech, which is at least as good as ours, which is something we did not expect, and they're selling it for a lot less. So what that means is that the market for U.S. companies decreases as the market for China increases, and that's kind of a win-win for China. They're less dependent on the United States, on the United States technology, and oh yeah, by the way, they get to shut us out of a bunch of markets, especially in the developing world where they're very price sensitive. Next, crypto companies are uh, really losing ground to deep fakes, and really points to how quickly deep fakes are moving. In this particular case, um, there's both audio and video deep fakes. More than half of those companies had claimed that they've been facing those kind of attacks. Um, Now you say, we're not a crypto company, so not a big deal. Well, that's true today. But what happens is, as the hackers become more proficient and come down the learning curve on that, or go up the learning curve, however you want to say that, um, then that attack vector is going to move downstream to smaller companies because it's going to be easier to go do and more automated, and script kiddies even are going to be able to do that. So, um, if you don't have a plan in place to deal with deep fakes, now would be a great time before you're dealing with it for real. And again, if you need help, let us know. Next, in the security news bites, Elon has admitted that he's intentionally making it harder for X users, Twitter users, to read news, except for the news that's on the site. His answer is, well, upload all of your news to my site and pay me for it. And then, because what he's doing, he's down promoting anything that has an external link on it. So, Blue Sky is adding something to the tune of 1 million users a week. Blue Sky is another microblogging site. It was actually founded by Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter. Um, and it apparently is becoming one of the big places of choice for people who are fed up with Twitter. Next, a 13-year-old pulls a crypto scam, but he discovers that pulling the scam may be easier than dealing with the results, and he got doxxed, and not fun for him. So, if you're going to be a hacker, do it right. And if you're a 13-year-old, that's probably pretty hard to do. New York has fined Geico about $10 million for a breach. In reality, they're a $20 billion company. A $10 million fine, which probably will be covered by insurance, is not much of a deterrent. Which is why the folks in the EU, are saying, 4% of your global revenue, 6% of your global revenue, 8%, even 10% of your global revenue, because that's what it's going to take. Instead of a $9.8 million fine, if they got hit with a $3 billion fine, well, all of a sudden now it's like, oh, well, that's real money. We need to be careful. Um, CrowdStrike booked speaking of real money, 30% increase in revenue after the July incident, but they are admitting that the sales cycle has gotten, quote, extended, meaning that, customers really didn't have much of a choice in the short term, but to continue their contract. But in the long term, they're rethinking their strategies. That will probably have a longer term impact on CrowdStrike. And data brokers are trying to fight a lawsuit out of New Jersey, which has a law that requires them to remove the data of a variety of public officials like law enforcement and judicial folks and their family members. They have 10 days to remove it, and apparently they haven't been doing it. The nature of the fine is such that the industry could be facing a multiple tens of billions of dollars in fines. So of course they're trying to get the lawsuit dismissed. The judge said, I don't think so. There's nothing unconstitutional about this law. You should consider following it. So, this, I'm sure, lawsuit will go on for a long time, but, word to the wise, following the law is probably your best strategy. All right. Well, that's all I have for today. Until next time, stay safe. If you need help, please contact us. And as always, you know, watch out. The bad guys are lurking. Take care.